トビデオ
It seems like in America, there exists an idea of what anime is. When you hear the word anime, what is the first image that comes to your mind? Probably something fast-paced, something high energy, something that might involve giant robots or magical sailor scouts, or extremely buff men shouting the names of attacks as they bury their aura-shrouded fist into the main villain's screaming face. And this is mostly because anime fans in America were introduced to the medium via action blogs such as Toonami, and the anime shown there tended to be of the action variety. And even as we grew up and broadened our horizons, we still find it hard to say the word anime and not think of, well, this. Because of this, it's entirely possible to forget that anime is more than just Gundams and Super Saiyans and Pocket Monsters. Anime doesn't have to be fast-paced action all of the time. It can, in fact, be slow. Like other mediums, anime can utilize a slow pace for a multitude of reasons. Sometimes to build a specific atmosphere that exists throughout the piece. Sometimes to allow the viewer to better contemplate the themes and ideas the anime wants to present. Sometimes to better match the lazy pacing of everyday life. Slow-paced anime is also just not limited to anime for adults and teens. It can also be seen in children's anime, particularly with the works of Studio Ghibli. My Neighbor Totoro, a classic children's film at home and abroad, is indeed remarkably low-key compared to American animated films that were coming out around the same time. But that film was still very accessible to all audiences. There have been instances of children's anime being incredibly atmospheric while delving into some pretty heavy subject matter, to a point where it almost seems inaccessible to some. I am, of course, talking about today's subject.
Galaxy Station. Current stop. Galaxy Station.
Night on the Galactic Railroad is very little of what a casual anime viewer would expect an anime to be, let alone an anime directed at children. The story revolves a young boy named Giovanni. Due to his sick mother and his father still not returning home from a long expedition, Giovanni is constantly balancing school, taking care of his sick mother, and working at his job at the local newspaper to earn money for his family. This causes him to have zero time to hang out with kids his age, thus making him a complete social outcast. The only friend he has is the kindly Campanella, who tries his best to mitigate the ridicule Giovanni receives. One night, while gazing up at the stars, a mysterious train appears in front of him, which he feels compelled to board. Campanella joins him shortly thereafter out of nowhere, and what follows is a haunting, mysterious journey to the literal ends of the universe, as Giovanni and Campanella contemplate self-sacrifice, happiness, and coming to grips with the end of life. Fun for the whole family! But before I can get into the movie proper, a little backstory. Night on the Galactic Railroad is an adaptation of a children's novel by Kenji Miyazawa. Written in 1927 but published posthumously in 1934, the novel was conceived after Miyazawa took a long train trip to cope with the death of his beloved sister. Sadly, he never fully finished it. He had completed a beginning and an end, but there were holes in the middle that never got filled due to his untimely death. Being a popular children's story in Japan, an animated adaptation was certainly in the cards. Ideas for an animated adaptation had been tossed around the industry up to that point, but no major studio felt compelled to take on such a project. Up to that point, Night on the Galactic Railroad was considered incredibly tricky to adapt. Ultimately, it was up to a tiny studio by the name of Group Tak that took on the project. Now, Group Tak had quite a pedigree starting out, since the company was formed by former staff of the Astro Boy anime, and yet the studio never became a household name like Gainax or Madhouse. This could be because Group Tak would often take weird projects that other studios wouldn't touch, resulting in quite an eclectic production history that ranged from Grenadier to Fighting Foodons to various Street Fighter adaptations. But regardless of the types of projects they did take on, they did try to add a tiny artistic touch to them. And that's what made their adaptation of Night on the Galactic Railroad work so well. As I said before, the story was considered a very difficult one to put into a visual media, and it is something that did require a creative vision to work. Why is that? I'll start off answering that question by answering another question you've probably had for the past few minutes. Why are they all cats? So remember me saying that Night on the Galactic Railroad was tricky to adapt? Well, one of the reasons why that is because the characters in it are very nondescript. We know that they are human children, but we don't know their hair color, or their eye color, or even their ages. We don't even know their nationality because what we can glean from the brief descriptions of the setting is that it takes place in a nondescript pseudo-European village. As such, everyone had different ideas of what Giovanni and Campanella looked like. The decision to make the cast full of cats was decided when one of the staff members read a manga adaptation of the story where all the characters were portrayed by cats. So, problem solved. Funnily enough, Miyazawa himself hated cats because to him, they were the only animal just as selfish as humans. So in a way, using cats as a stand-in for humans is perfect casting. So perfect, it would actually be reused in other Miyazawa-related anime. But what I really find fascinating about the character designs is how simple they look. All the cats are different enough to look visually distinct, but they have a similar shape to them. Nothing about them seems to be too over-designed or detailed, but when actual humans are introduced, they are way more simplified to the point they look like they came out of an anime from the 60s. Where Night on the Galactic Railroad is the most visually striking, however, is the atmosphere. It's a fantastic atmosphere, albeit not one filled with wonder and whimsy like other children's films. Rather, the atmosphere is evocative, haunting, ominous even. The whole film is bathed in this dreamlike haze throughout, even before Giovanni gets on the titular express. Town scenes are especially used effectively to set up the overall mood of the story. Even though the town appears to be bustling before and during the festival, it really wants to showcase the hidden loneliness Giovanni feels. The empty streets alongside stark white buildings, the insides of buildings are dark and empty like they are just 5 minutes away from closing for the day. Even when Giovanni has a warm, comforting conversation with his mother, we never see her. She only exists as a voice in another room.
I feel like Father's gonna be back soon. Don't you think so, Mom?
Yes, I think you're right.
And when Giovanni and Campanella get on the train, the mood and scenery shifts to become even more dreamlike. And as they get further down the railway, the sceneries become more and more surreal and begin to lose any sense of physicality until they reach the end of the universe, which is just a giant yawning hole in existence. But even as the sceneries become more dreamlike, they still retain a sense of emptiness. Even at their most grandiose, the sceneries they pass by feel very stark and minimalist, like the train is the only thing that is currently existing in that world at that time. The train itself is also a very empty setting. There are other passengers on that train, but we only see them if they are interacting with Giovanni and Campanella directly. For the most part, it feels like Giovanni and Campanella are the only ones in that train car. Night on the Galactic Railroad is a very empty film, and I mean that in the best way, and this is also reflected in the sound design. Rather than using sweeping orchestral scores, Night on the Galactic Railroad opts for something more understated. Composed by YMO luminary Harumi Hasano, the score is actually very minimalist and not in that still sounds like an actual song style that was in Robot Carnival. It's minimalist in that it feels more like ambiance than anything. It doesn't feel like a score, but a part of the background. And that's when there's any music at all. A lot of the film consists of long stretches of silence, the only sound coming from the background noise. It's actually used effectively because when the characters do speak, it feels like you want to focus on what they have just said.
My mother. She must be very far away by now. I'll bet she's thinking about me.
The dialogue is almost untouched from its original source material, so it really wants you to fully grasp the intertextuality of Miyazawa's work. Any additional dialogue is only added to hammer home the themes of the story, and that's probably one of the few complaints about this film. We'll get into this later, but having Giovanni's last line be a one-sentence summation of one of the themes feels a bit unnecessary. As for voice acting, the original Japanese feels a bit stronger thanks to Mayumi Tanaka and Chika Sakamoto's performances as Giovanni and Campanella respectively, adding a lot of innocence yet still carrying a lot of emotional weight in their voices.
ねえ、このままどこまでも一緒に行こう。そうだよ。僕はどこまでも君と一緒だ。うん。僕だってそうだ。
English dub is still perfectly listenable though, even if a lot of the actors feel like they are reading their lines directly from the book as they record.
Oh, it's so beautiful.
Please, go ahead and have some.
But I'm sorry. I know he's a great voice talent, I know he did a lot of work on this localization, and I know he's a huge fan of the original story, but Crispin Freeman honestly feels miscast.
They really tried. The others all ran after me, but they were just too late to catch me. Even Zanelli. He ran as fast as he could, but he just wasn't fast enough.
He sounds more like a teenager than a kid Giovanni's age, and it becomes way more apparent when Giovanni is voiced by Veronica OG Ash Ketchum Taylor.
I didn't think we'd get a chance to go off on our own tonight. I mean, did you, Campanella?
What do you mean? You thought we'd be with everyone from school?
No, not that. Forget it.
But the sounds of the voices are not as important as what those voices are saying. Throughout this video, I have been hinting at the themes of this anime because Night of the Galactic Railroad is incredibly heavy with themes and symbolism. Because Night of the Galactic Railroad is not just a story, but a meditation. As I stated before, Miyazawa originally wrote the original novel as a means to cope with the death of his beloved sister. As such, one of the central themes on Night in the Galactic Railroad is the subject of death. Because, spoiler alert, the titular railroad is a railroad to the afterlife. And, spoiler alert again, Campanella is the latest passenger with a one-way ticket. And sadly, Giovanni, being both not dead and having a special rare ticket that allows him to go back, is separated from Campanella in the end. Night on the Galactic Railroad is a meditation on life and death and how it affects us. One way the idea is presented to us is how it explains everything is ultimately temporary and will go away in the end. For example, at the start of the journey, Giovanni sees a field of flowers and declares he's going to jump out and pick some, only for Campanella to respond with,
It's too late now. Look, we've already passed them. They're far behind.
There's also Giovanni and Campanella coming across an exact replica of their town square only to come back a few minutes later and see it crumbling to stone. Giovanni grabbing a walnut from a stop only to have it disintegrate in his hand as soon as he steps onto the train. And how a passenger known as the bird catcher suddenly disappears while talking to Giovanni.
I sort of wish now that I had spent more time talking to him. It kind of felt like he was interrupting. I wanted him to leave, but now I feel bad.
So judging by these clips, you would come to the conclusion that life is fleeting and we should enjoy it while we can. And you would be 100% wrong! To better grasp the themes, we need to talk about Miyazawa's beliefs. In life, Miyazawa was a devout Buddhist, and not just any Buddhist mind you, but a Nichiren Buddhist. Nichiren Buddhism is a branch of Buddhism that focused exclusively on the Lotus Sutra. The Lotus Sutra is the most important doctrine in Buddhism because it is the final and ultimate teaching of the Buddha. The three main teachings explained in the sutra are as follows. 1. All prior teachings of the Buddha are extensions of one ultimate truth. 2. All living beings have the potential to become Buddhas. And 3. All life is eternal, with no beginning nor end. As you could imagine, the third teaching is the most significant one that applies here. Life and death are not a beginning nor an end. Once a person dies, they are going from one state of being to another. This point is best illustrated in a breathtaking scene with the aforementioned bird catcher. We see him go outside from the train, take a deep breath, catch birds, and once he finishes, lets out a dying breath before collapsing into nothingness. When Giovanni and Campanella turn around, he's back in the car with them like nothing happened. This sequence is symbolic of being born, living a life, and dying, and the bird catcher implies that this is something he has been doing for as long as he can remember. Life and death, two states of being eternal. But the best example happens at the end when Giovanni has Campanella's death confirmed to him, but he knows Campanella exists elsewhere now among the stars.
Campanella. No matter where I go, we'll always be together.
And I know I complained about that line earlier and I still stand behind that, but Giovanni summed it up perfectly. What Night on the Galactic Railroad is an exploration of life and death. Life is temporary, but so is death. We go from one state to the other, existing eternally, never beginning, yet never ending. But that's still just one aspect, and not even the main question Miyazawa poses. The big question Miyazawa wanted to answer when he wrote Night on the Galactic Railroad is, what is true happiness? Throughout the anime, characters posit what exactly is true happiness. Is it helping others?
But I think people are happiest when they do something truly good. That's why I think my mother will forgive me for what I've done. If people really tried to do their best, then I think everyone could be happy.
Is it spending your life doing what you enjoy or are good at?
There's really nothing more satisfying than hard work at a job you do well.
Is it giving yourself to God?
To reach true happiness, we must serve God, even if we do so from the depths of our lonely despair.
Is it accepting your fate and sacrificing yourself for the greater good of all?
Dear Lord, I beg of you, look into my heart and hear my prayer. In my next life, don't let me waste myself. Let me use my body for the true happiness of everyone in the world.
At first glance, it appears to say that either the first or the fourth answer are the correct ones. When Campanella talks about how he saved the life of Zanelli, Giovanni's bully, at the cost of his own life, he doesn't feel too broken up about it because he knows he helped save a life at the cost of his own. And it is also implied that this sacrifice allows him to reach the true heaven at the end of the galaxy, where his mother is.
I see now. That's where my mother is. She's waiting for me.
So Campanella has an idea of what happiness is, but what about Giovanni? It's made more explicit in the book, but throughout the journey, Giovanni is constantly wondering what true happiness is. This becomes apparent when he realizes he's the only one on the train who has a ticket that allows him to go anywhere. And he begins to feel that he can make any sacrifice for the happiness of other people. In a scene that was cut from the film, Giovanni gets into an argument with the human children saying that they should come with him to the ends of the universe and not get off at the Southern Cross because it is not the true heaven, even offering to give his ticket to them. But what about the second and third answers? The birdcatcher is portrayed as a very jovial soul who obviously loves his work. His portrayal of going outside and catching birds is symbolic of one living a life doing what they love, or at least doing what they are good at. It is not only seen as a source of happiness, but also living a fulfilling life. And while the third answer is told not only from the Christian perspective, but also from a man trying to put on a brave face and justify his actions, it still holds up to the Buddhist perspective. Nichiren himself said that there is no true happiness other than upholding faith in the Lotus Sutra. So giving yourself to your faith is said to be the true source of happiness as well, regardless of that faith. So the answer to what is true happiness is all of the above? Or how about none of the above? Yes, even with Miyazawa's strong beliefs, the story does briefly present the idea that everything presented throughout the story is neither a right answer nor a wrong answer, because people will inevitably come to different conclusions because everyone sees everything differently.
The evidence indicates that the rocks are 1.2 million years old. But to others, this region might look completely different. You see, it all depends on who might be looking at it.
And to me, that's the right call. Night on the Galactic Railroad is a very spiritual film, but it wants you to contemplate its spirituality rather than lay it into you as a gospel truth. That is why the visuals of this film are so hypnotic. That is why there is a lot of focus on ambiance and silence in between the spoken dialogue. That is why it uses slow pacing so effectively. It is a meditation in the most literal way possible. And all of this comes from a children's film. Night on the Galactic Railroad is easily something I would recommend, but for some, it may be an acquired taste. Its slow, deliberate pacing, use of heavy themes and symbolism, and occasionally off-putting imagery might cause some to see it as impenetrable, or at worst, boring. And I could understand why, because it's one of the least anime-looking animes out there. I myself had to watch it for a second time in order to fully appreciate the beauty of it. But you should still go watch it. Go see if you see a fantasy film, or a meditation on life, death, and happiness. After all, doesn't everyone see everything differently?